Guys, welcome back to the political landscape. Today I will be giving you my final 2024 governor election map. So let's get into it. We're going to start off with the safe states for each party. The first race I'm going to characterize as a safe state is Utah. I believe the Republicans will win Utah by 12 points or more. If we look at the polling out of Utah, we see that incumbent Cox is up by 40 points in the latest poll, and polls before that did show him up by considerable margins by 28 points and 26 points, respectively. And Utah is a predominantly Republican state. There is a large portion of Mormons in that state, which is a very Republican demographic, and so I do believe that Republicans will win this by a safe margin. The next state that we're going to look at is the state of Montana. If we look at the polls out of Montana, we see that incumbent Gianforte is up by 19 points in the latest poll. And while the Senate race is very competitive in this state, the governor's race is really not that competitive. Gianforte is a pretty popular incumbent, and it does look like he's going to win this state by a safe margin. The next characterization that we have is North Dakota. If we look at the polls out of North Dakota, we see that Armstrong is up 30 points against Peepcorn. And North Dakota is a very Republican state. It's actually one of the most Republican in the country. And so I do believe that this state will go to Armstrong by a safe margin. The next state that we're going to look at is the Missouri governor race. I do believe that this race is going to go to the Republican by a safe margin. If we look at the polls, right now we see that Kehoe is up by pretty considerable margins by 15 points, 12 points, and 16 points. And if you look at the polls, we see that only one poll out of the last 5 had this race below 12 points, which is a threshold for a safe margin. And even though the Senate race is semi-competitive in Missouri, the governor race I do not expect to be that competitive. Missouri is a very Republican state, and while it is left trending, I still do believe that the Republican will win this state by a safe margin. The next race that we're going to look at is the Indiana governor race. If we look at the polls out of Indiana, we see that Mike Brown has a slim lead over McCormick. Now, this race did not really used to be that competitive, as when you go back, we see that Mike Brown was up by 11 points. But I do want to say that a lot of these polls have been Democrat internal polls. This poll that showed McCormick and Hilltide was a Democrat internal. This poll that only had Brown up by 3 points over McCormick was a Democrat internal. And I do believe that this is going to go by a safe margin. Mike Braun is actually the incumbent senator, so he is retiring to run for governor, and I do believe he's going to win this by a safe margin, even though the polls are not reflecting that right now. And then the next Republican safe seat is West Virginia. Now, Jim Justice, the incumbent governor out of West Virginia, is retiring to run for the Senate, which he's heavily favored to win. And Maurizi is favored to take his place. And the only poll that we have out of 400 registered voters, we see that Maurizi is up by 14 points. Now, that is quite a slim margin, considering that Donald Trump won West Virginia by 39 points in 2020, but I do believe that the Republican will win this race by more than the polls are showing, just because of how Republican West Virginia is, and so I do have this going to the Republicans by a safe margin. And then the last safe state for the Republicans is Vermont. And yes, Vermont is the most Democrat state in the country, and this would be surprising if you didn't know too much about politics, but the reason why Scott is up by so much in this state is because when it comes to the ideology issues, like on issues of abortion and LGBTQ issues, we see that Scott is liberal, and so Republicans would call Scott kind of a rhino, basically, a Republican in name only. But Scott is a very popular incumbent in Vermont. And even though Vermont is a very Democrat state, they are willing to split the ticket and vote Republican. And so for that reason, I have Vermont as a safe margin. Now we're going to go to the Democrats' safe states. Our first one we have is Washington. If we look at the polls out of Washington, we see that Ferguson is up against Reichert by 17 points in the latest poll. And surprisingly enough, the closest poll was actually a Democrat internal by Northwest Progressive Institute, showing Ferguson only up by 7 points. And Washington voted for Biden by 19 points in 2020, and I do believe that the Democrat is going to win this by a safe margin. Another safe state that we have for the Democrats is Delaware. If we look at the polling out of Delaware, we see that Meyer is up by 27 points in the latest poll, and before that she was up by 19 points. And Delaware, of course, is a very Democrat state and is expected to go to the Democrats by a likely margin. So with our safe states done, we see that Republicans are at 7 and Democrats are at 2, with 2 more races outstanding. Now we're going to go to the North Carolina race. This one's going to be a likely Democrat seat. That means it's going to be determined between 6 and 12 percentage points. Now that might be surprising, considering if we look at the presidential polling out of the state, we see that Trump is really only up by 1.4%. And really the reason why Republicans are doing so bad in this race is because they decided to nominate Mark Robinson. And you see that early on this campaign, there wasn't a lot of polls, and it was close between Stein and Robinson. But around September, when it became really bad for Robinson, was when there was a CNN report that showed Mark Robinson having racist remarks on a website. That really swung the race in Stein's favor, and now he's actually up by 15 points, according to the polling average, even though those same polls only have Trump up by 1.4%. Now, just considering how North Carolina votes, I don't think that 16% of voters are going to split ticket. I definitely think that Republicans might not vote in the governor's race, so I don't think it's going to go by a safe margin as it shows in the polling average by 15 points. But I still do believe that Democrats will handily win this seat by a likely margin. And so that finishes off with just one race to go, and that's the New Hampshire race. If we look at the polling out of New Hampshire, we see that Ayate, who is the Republican, is up by 1.2% according to the Real Clear polling average. Now, if we look at the presidential polling out of New Hampshire, we see that Harris is up by 5 points. So that basically means that 6% of voters are looking like they're going to split ticket in this election. And New Hampshire is definitely one of those states that does split ticket. We look back at 2022, Joe Biden won this state by 7.3%, but then when it came to the governor, Chris Sununu, who was the Republican incumbent, won this by close to 32 percentage points. And so New Hampshire, like Maine, definitely is a split ticketing state, and while they might vote for Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, I do think that they are going to split ticket and vote for Ayate. Ayate does have the endorsement of Chris Sununu, who is the incumbent governor from the state, and so I do believe that she is going to be able to pull this off by a tilt margin. So this is my final map. Republicans would win 8 out of the 11 governor races, and Democrats would win 3 out of the 11 governor races. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to smash the like button down below and subscribe. Comment your thoughts or suggestions in the comment section down below. Shout out to Diana Barbie, our first channel member. If you would like to become a member, you can hit the join button near my channel logo. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.